I guess first things first, just I guess introduce yourself a little bit. Like you don't have to give your real name. You can
Yeah.
just say whatever you want and just kind of I guess start with your story, start to finish. Like how did you get involved? What was the first thing you did? Kind of what led up to everything.
We'll just go by Mongo.
Okay, Mongo.
Yeah. Um, I guess I got started when I was late teens. I was just running numbers for my uncle. We would collect bet slips for the numbers racket, and then I would take them to a location and turn in money in the numbers that were picked. The numbers were picked from the horse races, and they picked four numbers out of the different races. And then if out of the races, if your numbers showed up, you won. It's kind of like a lottery betting. You know,
Okay.
cops would bet their badge numbers, and people their kids' birth dates and stuff. Some people played all the same number all the time. Um, I did that through high school. Plus, we did betting cards, football games. You pay so much for the card and pick the teams that you wanted to win and the odds, and see if they could, win like that. It was a big deal in school. There's about 4 or 5 guys doing that for different people.
Were you friends with those guys? Were you kind of like in the same group?
No, we weren't in the same group. They were just, a lot of them were doing it for their dads or a relative, picking it up because a lot of bookies and stuff lived in town. Actually, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was an article in Playboy that the town I lived in had 70% of the hitmen on the East Coast lived in that town.
Wow.
And, and I did basically, just stuff like that, to school, then get involved in a whole bunch of stuff, and that was the family out of New York that was running everything over on the Jersey side. For a while there, my grandfather had a little candy store in Newark, and it was a bookie joint basically. They didn't really sell candy that much at the front. The books were kept in the back for gambling. So it was kind of a family affair for a while. And then a few years after school, we moved down to Texas for basically my mom's health. So I moved with my dad, and I was pretty much quiet out of the business for a while. And then I got into the nightclub business that was owned by another family, and they knew my uncle. And so I would run clubs for them, run errands. Then I started collecting. I was powerlifting at the time, and I started collecting on gambling debts. I was in my 20s then. I was pretty big. It's how I got the name Mongo. I went to pick a guy up the airport. He was a card mechanic for card games. There were rigged games. There were 7 guys, and 6 of the guys were in on it, and the one mark would be there. And this guy could put a cold deck in a game, and you never know it. He'd switch decks, and the decks would be rigged. There'd be one hand that could beat him, and no matter what you had in your hand, if you got a deuce in your hand, you folded your hand. Didn't care if you had 4 aces in your hand, you folded it because it was set up for him to keep betting and lose. Took an airline pilot over about 4 games for over 100 grand.
Wow.
And then everybody would split up. They'd have a couple of girls there to help distract the guy. And if they had to rearrange the decks, they would, go to the back with one of the girls to set the decks up. Because even they let the guy cut the card, he cut it exactly where they wanted him to anyway, where they rigged the decks up. I went to go pick this guy up at the airport, and I got out of the car, and one of those redneck pickup trucks was there with the wing camper door open, and ripped my eyes off shirt and cut my arm on it. I ripped the side mirror off the truck and put it through the windshield. That's how I got the nickname Mongo from doing that. And then I started doing running, some clubs. They were topless clubs and other things. They were all owned, the buildings, by a vending company. And the vending company was out of Kansas City. And didn't care if you had a DJ in there, spinning records for the girls or whatever. There had to be $600 in 2 jukeboxes every week. If it wasn't, then you risked a fire. Then I'd start collecting the gambling debts, and the bookie paid on Tuesday, collected on Thursday. First week you didn't have your bet money plus the 10% vig, you owed them 20%. You didn't have it the second week, then I would show up and pretty much beat the crap out of you to get the money if you didn't give it to me when I showed up. And if you didn't have it a third week, then somebody else would show up, and then nobody'd ever hear from you again. And I had this one guy, he couldn't pick the winner in a 1-horse race. And every time I had to see him, it was always a sob story, and he'd always wind up getting something broke or slapped around. And one night I went into a club that I was supposed to be doing security in, and the guy was sitting at the bar, and I walked up to the bar, and he saw me, and he pissed his pants. And I had to tell him, I said, "I'm not here for you." I said, "I'm here to vote for somebody else." Because he got so scared because he hadn't bet that week.
Gotcha. Okay.
By the time I was running, I had to take a car and drive it from Dallas to Philadelphia, which is where little Nicky was at. He was the boss of the Chasey family there. And in the trunk of the car was a couple suitcases full of money. And I drive from Dallas, I drive basically almost straight through to Philly. And I dropped the car at the airport parking lot, and leave the key underneath the wheel well. And then I take a plane and I drive back. I'll fly back to Dallas. And then they would pick the car up at the parking lot and drive it off. And never had no problems because I never opened that trunk and never opened up them cases.
How many times did you do jobs like that?
A couple dozen times probably.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then they had me working security at the modeling studios. They were called, now they're massage parlors, but back then in the early 80s, they were called nude modeling studios. They were whorehouses. And I'd have to go sit there and make sure that nothing happened and collect the money. And one night I was back in the front kitchen. It was actually in a mobile home, a 3-bedroom mobile home. I was out in the country. And some guys were out there and sitting there, and they thought the girls were alone and started causing some problems. And so I just slid open a sliding door and come out the door, and the guy goes, "Uh-oh, Cujo's here." And so that's all the girls started calling me Cujo. Because I just told them, I said, you ain't giving these girls trouble. I said, time for you guys to just leave. The one guy thought he was going to be big, and then he left through the front door down the steps and landed on the hood of his car.
Wow.
Uh, so did a lot of different things, nothing real bad. But they came down to bust the modeling studios. And this one guy, Tony, he had a place and he was always late paying the rent on the building because they owned the buildings and then would lease the buildings out to the pimps. And so I went there one day and shoved him into the wall and looked like a cartoon because of the image of his body stuck in the busted plaster on the wall. And he ends up dying like 3 months later. He had cancer. Nobody knew it. And so they would take credit cards at these places. And what they did was, the credit card company would charge you, so much percentage to cash the cards. And they'd fill out, so much for 15 minutes in a room or 20-minute session in a room. And the girls would make that money, they put down tea service.
Yeah.
So the checks would have to come back. And being that Tony wasn't there and the checks were supposed to come in his name, they put the checks in my name. So these idiot that was running the thing, he said he found a company that was going to give him a better percentage rate on cashing the cards so they'd make more money. And it's always about the money. It's always about the dollars. And so they got this company called iMac that they were sending the cards off to. So every time I would collect all the receipts and we'd mail them off, it was come back a few weeks later and the check would come. Mm-hmm. So iMac stood for I am a cop. And so every time they mailed the receipts off, it was a federal charge for using the mail. Yeah. And when they mailed the check back, it was another charge. So every transaction was 2 charges. And the government waits a long time to do this. So they had dozens of charges going on for this. Because the government, if you get caught by the feds, they win 95% of their cases.
Yeah.
So if you get a federal charge, your butt's pretty much going away. So it was right after my youngest daughter was born. She was a month old, matter of fact. It was just for Christmas. Cars started pulling up around the house. And there's 2 federal marshals in one and 12 Fort Worth police officers in riot gear surrounding the house. They were coming to get me because I was the violent one. And being that those 2 checks came back in my name, it been charged against me for this. And so they come knocking on the door, and my wife at the time says, well, what do I do? I said, well, open the door. If not, they're gonna bust it in. So they come in and they say, are you Mongo so-and-so? And I said, yeah. They go, you're under arrest. I said, no shit, I don't think you came for tea. And I stood there with my hands up, And you like television where the guys start fighting and running and shooting, and that's how you die. One of the cops ran to the back because they were looking for the people I worked for. Thought one of them was there, and he opened the back door and he's yelling, no, it's me. I had to tell him, I said, you guys calm down. Somebody gets shot doing this, I'm going to get blamed for it. So I ain't resisting. I just told my wife, I said, call a lawyer. And I told the guys, let's go. They put me in the handcuffs and put me in a car. Because you're going to do stuff, you need to keep a lawyer on hand. And then if they come for you, you just call the lawyer. That's his job. These idiots who want to run and fight the police and do all that stuff and get their butts killed are stupid. There's low key way to do things, and you wind up living a lot longer. Like I say, I never got involved with any of the drug stuff because you can't trust drug people. Because they all want to be gangsters. They want to do this. And as soon as they get busted, they sing in it. They go to the DA's office and it becomes, let's make a deal. And like the saying says, the last liar on the list ain't got a chance.
Yeah.
So, you do your time, you do your crime, you do your time if you get caught, kept my mouth shut. They asked me, I was in the car and they were asking me about rolling over. And I just said no. I call it the old Italian proverb. Some people call it something else, but it's better to get tried by 12 than get carried by 6.
Yeah.
What
were the charges?
Strong arming, racketeering, using the mail for laundering money.
How many years were you facing?
If they stacked it all, 120 years.
Oh my God.
But see, I'd never been busted before, really. I never had a criminal charge that stuck. So I had a clean record. So then the only thing they had on me was 2 checks. And they were really wanting the guys I worked for. And we wound up, the 3 of us sitting charged at the same time at the table. And so I wound up getting 5 years probation. And the other guys got 20 years.
Wow. You got lucky.
Yeah. And of course, my bond was $750,000. And federally, you got to have 20% of that. Look, I had some people that helped me out to get me out of jail.
Yeah.
Because I spent a couple of weeks in there before they're getting ready, because they were going to send my ass to Terre Haute, Indiana, which is where they send all the violent federal people. Because the DA called me the Bone Crusher.
You had a lot of nicknames.
Yeah. And like I say, the guy's name was Harry Koch. Koch, Koche. He was German. And one of the guys I worked for that was in charge was there for the trial. And we were standing outside the courtroom doing when the jury was deliberating. And the DA went walking by, and we'll call him Norman, said, "Hey, you think his father was a Nazi?" And he turned around and jumped at Norman and knocked him over. And he was an older man. He was an old guy. So I get him up and stuff, and they break it up, and the judge goes berserk. A. Joe Fish was the judge, federal judge, one of the youngest judges appointed by Reagan. And I was, Norman went home, put a 2x4 in a vise, ran into it to crack a rib so he could turn around and try and sue the prosecutor.
What?
Yeah. He's a vindictive little bastard. And so, after everything was over and I got my probation, I had to find a job. It's hard to find a job because I was ordered I could not be involved in any adult businesses and stuff. And so I wound up for a while driving a delivery truck for a liquor company. Anyway, that's when I moved to North Carolina. And I didn't know it, but while I was in North Carolina, I was on my probation. I was working in the restaurants and stuff. And my probation officer was a woman, and she tried to get me off early because I wasn't causing any trouble. I only had 1 charge, in my entire life that stuck. And the judge denied it. But I found out he let the other 3 guys out early. And she couldn't figure it because I've never asked for someone to get let off early and they didn't get it. And what it wound up was that Norman knew the prosecutor in Philly. And prosecutor in Philly was a black guy,
Mhm.
African American, whatever is politically correct now. And he called down the cops and said that they had, and this guy was from Harvard educated. He did not sound black at all. Said they had a black guy that they were sending down to Dallas and stuff. And cops starts running his redneck mouth saying, "You send that boy down here. We know how to handle him ends down here." And so Coke wound up getting disbarred
Wow.
and fired over it. And Norman did it just to set his ass up to get him back
Wow.
for what he did. Yeah, because you can't be a prosecutor and be rolling out racist stuff, especially to another prosecutor in another city, Philly. It's funny, sometimes we'd have to go and take some money and we would fly to Atlantic City, and we couldn't go into Philadelphia, which is the closest airport to Atlantic City, because Norman wasn't allowed back in Philly on a plea agreement. So we would have to fly all the way to Newark. And then the Golden Nugget would send a limousine for us, pick us up, and drive us 3 hours down to Atlantic City. That was pretty cool because Diana Ross came, sat at the table one night.
Nice.
Yeah. Wound up meeting a lot of movie stars or a lot of music people because of the club businesses and stuff. So it's pretty interesting life. Don't regret a thing except getting caught. But eventually that life catches up to you, and most guys just get out when they're dead.
That is very true.
But I wasn't a made guy. I wasn't, I kept my mouth shut, took my medicine, didn't roll over anybody. That's the difference with guys now, and even in the family, they'll roll over in a heartbeat. There's no being a stand-up guy anymore.
Yeah.
Because you never heard of that stuff in the early days of the family. Once you were made, you kept your mouth shut and you went on. But nowadays, they're all looking to make a deal, get their ass into trouble because they don't want to go to jail. They'll cut a deal in a heartbeat. And that's why people wind up disappearing sometimes.
So, how much longer after your arrest were you involved? Were you still somewhat involved when you were living in North Carolina, or were you pretty much out at that point?
No, I was out after that because I found out one of the guys thought I was going to turn on something else. And they called me up one night and said that they wanted me to go work a poker game. And the poker game was always at somebody's house. This guy wanted to do it in a clothing warehouse. And I knew if I showed up for that game, I wasn't leaving that warehouse.
Wow.
I went rolled up in a roll of material somewhere and put in the back of a truck. Wow. That was when I was in Texas. So I said, no, I said, I was already broke because I couldn't do anything. And so I said, I could permission him because every time I had to move now, I had to get permission from my probation officer. To be able to get out, to be able to go anywhere and leave the state or even leave the county where I was living in.
Yeah.
But I went back to just being a clean living guy and, got out. I still would talk to people, met people, but I didn't get involved in anything anymore.
Yeah.
Because by then, I had a wife, 3 kids, and wasn't going to get them involved and get tired of the life sometimes.
Yeah. Did your wife know what you were doing when you first met and got married and had
No,
children? No.
no, I was working at the club, met her at the club. She was bartending. And after, you know, I left that and got into, running the strip clubs and stuff is when things picked up a lot. And then when I was doing the Byline studio stuff, yes, she found out about that, you know, and, because I'll be gone sometimes a day or two, having to travel and do stuff.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about being a maid guy, and I know there's differences between the Italian Sicilian mafia compared to the American mafia. Um, Tell us a little bit about the Omerta and basically kind of what the rules were or what the I guess.
Well, be made, you had to be 100% Italian. They had to be able to trace your family back to there. And that was, a lot of that was just so that they could threaten you if you tried to do something, with your family. Because, it's family and it's tight, but it's still about money and keeping people, fat. To be a maid guy used to be, you had to earn your bones by killing some people, doing some hits. And then it got to where it was more of a money thing. They opened a book, see how much you were earning. If you were a good earner and you were trustworthy, then you could become a maid man. And then you'd go for the ceremony, the secret ceremony, what exactly said, but, they would get a card like with a saint on it, and they would set it on fire and you had to hold it in your hand while it burnt and then repeat your oath, to the family. What being a maid guy was that you could do anything to anybody as long as they also weren't a maid guy.
Yeah.
And if you want to do something with a maid guy, then you had to have a good reason and get permission from the higher ups to do it. I know in Jersey, the most of the maid guys and all, they stayed around in Cherry Hill. There's a place called the Compound there, and that's where they were. Like the family when I was down in Texas, was out of Philadelphia, was the Chase family run by little Nicky Scarfo. He just died in prison. Nicky was all right for a while. He ran a lot of everything in Atlantic City. And then he started going a little bit nuts and getting paranoid and just killing anybody for anything. Because like I say, because more people get killed over whatever they said, talking out of line, than whatever they ever did.
Exactly.
That's why I never drank. Because when your mouth gets too loose, you get stoned or you get drunk, you could say something and wind up getting your head blowed off.
Yeah. So, how much money did you make, based on your activities? Was it enough to where you didn't like have to work a real job? You just kind of did that for like a cover, or did you make a good living with that?
It was a cover and it was a decent living. I mean, I got 20% of what I collected. And so I had a minimum amount that I would go for. It had to be at least 10 grand. The guy had to owe. Because I wasn't going to run around and risk jail time for $100 that a guy didn't pay. Other lower guys to do that kind of stuff. It's like nowadays it's hard to do anything because there's cameras everywhere. You go rough a guy up, it's private. Now you gotta start roughing a guy up. You gotta worry some asshole's gonna pull out a cell phone and start recording it and putting it on YouTube, trying to get hits.
Yeah.
You know, and there are cameras on every street corner and every building. You know, it's hard to get away with things nowadays.
That's true. So I know you mentioned that your grandfather and your uncle, they were all involved. Was most of the older members of your family involved, and was anyone else like your generation or younger still involved, or did it kind of start, I guess, dying out a little bit?
Well, some had died out. Some of the guys, you know, my cousin, my other brothers and cousins didn't want to get involved, you know, because they wanted to be doctors and lawyers and stuff like that. You know, so that they stayed out of it. You know, my grandfather did the bookie thing for a while, you know, and then, you know, he also had a brick mason company
Mhm.
that he ran, and that was controlled by the Teamsters. The Teamsters union was controlled by the mob for decades,
Yeah.
you know. And so they actually, you know, like they actually didn't own the casino, but they owned all the workers, the unions,
Yeah. So what
you
happened to
know.
Jimmy Hoffa?
He disappeared. Some people say he was made into dog food at a rendering plant. Some people say he was buried in the middle of a giant stadium on the 50-yard line,
Yeah.
which is, you know, but nobody that ever was involved ever said a word, so nobody actually knows exactly what happened. He just disappeared at a restaurant.
Yeah. So, got a couple more questions from class members. You pretty much answered a lot of them, but I actually really like this
Supposed to be
question.
having a meeting.
I think says, so if you were to create a film based on the mafia, what would you do differently from the popular mafia-based movies? So, like, what would you change, or what would you add in?
Uh, well, a lot of that stuff has to get dramatized out, you know.
Mhm.
Like I say, you know, the big argument that ends up with the guy getting killed, you know, or the guy doing something, you know, it never actually ends that way. You
Yeah.
know, it's real quiet. You know, like he says during Goodfellas, the guy who kills you isn't an enemy. He's your best friend that came to you when you're in in need and blows you away, and then you disappear.
Yeah.
Yeah, like say you know, the old gangster movies, you know, with the machine guns firing and stuff. You know, that's 1920 stuff. You know, but now everything is done really low key. You know, with it. So the big violent scenes, you know, that stuff just doesn't happen. You know, it's done one on one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much all the questions I had. Thank you so much for talking with us and sharing your story a little bit. I know the class is going to be pretty excited to hear all this. So, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go, or?
No, no, just remember when you do something, you know, you get that record, it follows you everywhere.
Hmm.
You know, you try and get a business license, become a doctor, a nurse, or whatever, but you want to do something stupid when you're younger, you could throw your time away because, you know, getting locked up ain't fun. You know, it doesn't, you know, give you street cred or all the other crap that they say. Because how many guys you see, the big shots, and then when they're standing in the courtroom, they bust out in tears and starts crying and begging. You know, not to spend the rest of their damn life in prison. But it's choices you make in life. Like I say, I don't regret what I did. Other than getting caught, you know, it was fun. I had a lot of fun doing things, you know, but you got to grow up and reality sets in sometimes. And if you don't want to do it for forever, don't start, because otherwise you'll be stuck doing it forever.
Good advice. Nice. Thank you very much, Mongo. I'll let you know if the class has any follow-up questions. Maybe we could do a part 2 if you're up for it.
So I'm sure the stuff we missed that we talked about before.
Well, you have almost 20 years worth of stories, so I'm sure there's a lot more in there.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much, and I'll be talking with you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.